Russian troops have taken Sverdlikovo. The Kursk front collapsed earlier than expected. Today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of February 12, 2025. A tremendous number of events have occurred, so let's get started. We'll begin with the United States, where perhaps the most important news is coming from. Today, Trump had a second conversation with Putin. The discussion lasted an hour and a half, after which Trump instructed his team to begin peace negotiations. The Russian side stated that resolving the conflict should start with addressing the root cause that led to the war. I remind you that in December 2021, Vladimir Putin addressed the West, particularly the United States, with security proposals, which President Biden rejected. The core of Putin's position is the issue of NATO forces moving closer to Russia's borders and gradually absorbing Ukraine. For Putin, Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. After speaking with Putin, Trump had a conversation with Zelensky. Their discussion primarily focused on the upcoming meeting in Munich between the US Vice President and the Ukrainian side. Judging by the duration, Trump's conversation with Zelensky was brief. It is clear that Trump treats Zelensky with disdain, likely remembering how Zelensky acted towards him in the past. Moreover, the US president strongly dislikes beggars who constantly demand more money and weapons. Situation in Ukraine. I remind you that on the night between February 11th and 12th, the Russian Federation launched a massive missile strike on Ukrainian territory, primarily targeting Kyiv. A huge number of Iskanders reached their targets. Let's continue with the Sudzha salient, from which very important news is coming. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian side has carried out numerous strikes on the Sudzha salient and the Sumy region. In these frames, we can see another temporary deployment point of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, in the Sudzha district being hit by Russian troops. As a result, several depots may have been destroyed, though no information on casualties has been provided. Further south, near the settlement of Sumy, footage has been released showing Geran drone strikes. The footage depicts a temporary deployment point of either the 80th or 82nd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Following a drone strike, a fire and secondary detonation occurred, and in this moment, we can see the explosion of a weapons depot, completely destroying an entire building. Now, let's move to the front line. Today's key updates come from the settlement of Sverdlikovo. In these frames, we can observe drone strikes on the frontline positions of the Russian armed forces in the area. Based on this footage, map updates are taking place. As we can see, the Russian army is gradually expanding its control zone, gradually painting the contested territory under the control of the Russian armed forces. Some pro-Russian sources report that the Russian side already controls approximately 70 to 80% of the settlement, with only the eastern part remaining under Ukrainian formations. Now we move to Kupiansk, from where a large amount of information is also coming in. On the northern Kupiansk sector, another crossing built by the Ukrainian armed forces between the left and right banks of the Oskil River has been destroyed. Work is gradually being carried out on logistics without active advances along the front line. The first adjustments to the front line are coming from the southern Kupiansk direction, specifically the Lyman sector. According to various mapping services, including pro-Ukrainian ones, the Russian armed forces have slightly expanded their control zone west of the settlement of Makiivka. Further south, near Yampolivka and Torske, Russian units are completing the clearing of the settlement and gradually advancing toward the village of Torske. According to various mapping services, over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has made slight advances in two forested areas between Torske and Yampolivka. The Russian Ministry of Defense will likely soon report another advance. Now let's move towards Chasiv Yar. Over the past 24 hours, the map has not changed. The situation remains similar in Toretsk, key events in the Pokrovsk and southern Donetsk directions. Let's start with the Pokrovsk direction, where intense fighting continues for the settlements of Kotlin and Pishchane. Today, several videos were released by the 425th Skal Battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, showing Russian formations attempting a counterattack toward Kotlin. According to various experts and objective control footage, as well as fragmented information coming from this sector, it is highly likely that during several counterattacks, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to regain full control of the southeastern part of Kotlin. This has effectively blocked Russian units positioned in the northern part of Kotlin and at the Pokrovsky mine management site. In these frames, we see an attempt by the Russian Federation to counterattack and unblock its units. However, this attempt was not entirely successful. A similar situation is reported from Pischana. More and more evidence and control footage confirm that during a counterattack, Ukrainian formations managed to gain a foothold in the settlement, consolidate and expand their control zone. Some pro-Russian sources claim that Pischane has come under the full and confident control of the Ukrainian armed forces. This information was reported on the evening of February 11th, possibly even on February 10th. However, by February 12th, the Russian side may have regained control in counterattacks. It is difficult to say for sure. At least over the past 24 hours, a video from a construction site was published, showing a Russian flag. It is unclear whether the flag was dropped by a drone or if the Russian side actually maintained its presence at key strategic locations. Now, moving to the southern Donetsk direction. According to various mapping services, the Russian armed forces have fully secured control over the T-0515 highway between the settlements of Yasenevo and Andriivka. Based on this information, the area is marked as contested. Now we move to Andriivka itself. Increasing publications suggest that its capture is nearing completion. While Russian formations initially advanced slowly, progress is now being made at a pace of several kilometers westward. Just a few hours ago, pro-Ukrainian sources released the latest updates to the front line, indicating that Russian forces have already reached the western outskirts of Andriivka. This suggests that in the coming days, perhaps 2, 3, or a week, the entire settlement will be fully cleared. This will mark the beginning of an encirclement formation between Konstantinivka and Ulakli. No definitive control footage has been released to confirm this information, but numerous mapping sources corroborate it. Now, moving further in the southern Donetsk direction, where multiple frontline adjustments have been reported. Today, reports unanimously state that after a prolonged operational pause, the Russian army has launched a large-scale offensive from Novoselka to Dnipro-Enahaya. Attacks are occurring along the entire front line. This information is confirmed by both neutral and pro-Ukrainian mapping services. As we see from map changes, the Russian army is attempting to storm Novoselka, wedged between the stronghold northwest of Velika Novosilka and the village of Privolne, and launch attacks on this stronghold from both the east and southeast. There are also reports of advances from Novi Komar towards Dnipro-Enahaya, indicating a broad front assault. The Russian side has seemingly managed to accumulate forces and reserves after clearing Velika Novosilka. We will continue to monitor how the situation unfolds. However, there is a very high likelihood that the Ukrainian defense will not withstand the pressure and will collapse under the Russian forces, forcing Ukraine to retreat further into an uncertain distance.